the recording will be good. It's a great legacy. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So what I will do is briefly talk about why we started West Africa Review, as opposed to not as a way of telling you what you need to do, but to understand the dynamics of why this journal became pressing at the time it did. And a group of us who have at the time moved over to North America to work found it pressing to ensure that the West Africa perspective in scholarship, in ideas are preserved. And so let me quickly give you a brief background of the landscape. The landscape at the time was one in which Africa was not factored into intellectual domain. And that is in the 1990s. So beginning from 1990 onward. Few Africans who have already made their mark were known. And they were going to be the only people who the West, in terms of scholarship and publishing, would listen to their ideas. A newer generation, the ideas was that if you anchor your work squarely and fully in your African experience and reality, it doesn't get the traction it requires. In fact, it's seen as a turn off. So we needed a space, and I'm talking of the Africans in diaspora, who had emigrated for jobs, needed to be able to preserve the literary tradition, literature, history, art, a whole variety of things. So I'm going to encapsulate my talk in four main areas. One is the concept of the politics of knowledge, which is reinforced by the politics of citation. Those two are grounded on the epistemology of whiteness, where now we have what sometimes people call gatekeepers, who ensure that ideas that are not reinforcing the white perspectives don't get published. But I go beyond calling them gatekeepers. I see them as border patrol, because they closely patrol the border to ensure that what is published from Africa is one that reinforces the epistemology, where the white lens, the white views of Africa, the white assumptions of Africa are dominant. So if you're going to present a view that is going to undermine that, and you submit your paper to any journal, it will be undermined. Meaning it will be either desk rejected or sent to many multiple publishers, reviewers, who at the end would tell you your ideas lack intellectual merit. And after some time, a few months or a year later, you will find that ideas, or those ideas that were part of your work, which had been sent out to review, are now coming out in the works of people you know did not come to Africa to do the research or the scholarship, which suggests that sometimes when you send out your materials for review, reviewers may take a long time to respond. Your paper may end up being rejected, but at the end of it, your ideas have been appropriated by somebody else. Let me quickly go back to the politics of knowledge. So the politics of knowledge actually frames how we engage scholarship, knowledge production, and theorizing in the space that is Western. And I say the space that is Western because the Chinese order of knowledge or the Indian order of knowledge is not part of this knowledge production. The pivotal basis of this production is Europe, increasingly North American, which is United States and Canada. And it's squarely in terms of one that amplifies the theories of white scholars, white researchers, and white producers of knowledge. And at the very core of that idea is one in which Africa comes out as a pathology. Africa is looked at in relation to the dominant structure, which is the white structure. And the African approaches to Africa is one in which is Africa as a place of malaise, a place of disease, riddled with a lot of problems, tribality, a whole host of other negative factors that fails in most cases to really see the strengths that Africans have, the resilience of Africans in producing and orchestrating their lives and dealing with the global assaults of racism, colonialism, imperialism, which still continues today, how they navigate that and still are able to thrive and existentially produce materials that need to be looked at. And this is because the Africans have something to say. In the areas of history, a lot of the times our historical narrative is skewed to the archival documents that are in colonial archives or that white travelers and white slaverers had accumulated. So when somebody in any point of West Africa is talking about this happens in my community, this is some of the histories, you are oftentimes challenged based on some archival document of some traveler in the 16th century or the 17th century or 18th century who wrote something he heard or saw or missaw, and that is represented as gospel truth. That vision is the one that speaks to Africa, even though the person who's narrating does not even have a deep understanding of the people, doesn't understand the language, never did, doesn't understand the significance of what was happening. Those ideas are taken as the yardstick. And whatever you are producing or saying, you as the African, you are pressured to make it align with that knowledge that has been produced. So in the politics of knowledge, there are people who are conceived as the intellectuals who can theorize. The Africans can be seen as informants who provide data to hand over to the white theorizers because they're the ones with the rationality to be able to put the information together. And you will notice increasingly that certain concepts are circulating. Africa south of the Sahara, which clearly tells you it's not the African defining themselves, it's somebody defining Africa and is saying bluntly, this is how Africans and African need to look at themselves. And that mode of looking does not align with reality, how Africans have conceptualized themselves over centuries through migrations, through trade routes, through linkages, through family histories. So West Africa and North Africa are not separate zones, are not separated by the Sahara. They've traveled across the Sahara and their families on both sides. So utilizing the concept Africa south of the Sahara forces Africans who are so-called below the Sahara to delete all the links they had historically from the North and to reconceptualize, even in terms of economics, how they survived. Because a lot of the gold that came out of the gold mines traveled across the Sahara, even to Egypt in the 15th century. And we know it has such a phenomenal effect that it brought down the price of gold for 30 years when Mansa Musa went to on the Hajj. Now, those histories are now going to be reshaped because contemporary Africans are now being pressured in terms of thinking of ourselves with this Sahara as a barrier that eliminates, deletes a large section of our history. Increasingly, another concept that is percolating is that of conversations. Let's have conversations. So it's again very much tied to this notion of Africans as the informant. You bring out the data, but the person who theorizes is not the person who's having a conversation, because you're conversing and telling them what you know. But when it gets to that aspect of theorizing, the African scholarship is reduced to that of informant, which is why in edited collections, you will find that a lot of the Africans are placed in the area where they provide data, but some white scholars will reserve themselves the first section of the edited collection where they make the grand theories, which is a way of saying Africans cannot theorize. Or for you to theorize, it might undermine how knowledge has been organized, and we are not going to allow you to do that. So that's part of the insidious nature of the politics of knowledge. We all began approaching knowledge when we came here as objective. Everybody is capable of rationality. Everybody can research, everybody can theorize, but it became clear quickly that there is this underlying assumption based on this underlying politics that we don't pay attention to, which tries to ascertain those who can theorize and those who cannot. And our works, when we present them as theoretical, they are somehow undermined or downgraded as lacking theory. Now, the politics of citation now goes to buttress the politics of knowledge. For something then to be seen as knowledge worthy of scholarship, you have to have citation. There's a joke where somebody says, if you cite one person, it's plagiarism. If you cite multiple people, it's scholarship. Then you have to look at the people setting out those rules. But the rules that you are being prodded to take is the ones which underscore that scholarship is based on textuality, the textual. So who are the producers of the textual materials? So even if you did oral research, the knowledge you came with by living in the culture, you are asked, well, how do you know that? Can you give us some citations, some literature? So you are being asked to look to literature to cite your own experience. Whereas within the West, they reserve the right to theorize about the West from their own knowledge base because that's what they know. But that same strategy is denied Africans within the context of the Western theory of knowledge. You cannot take that leap because you have to prove that you know what you're doing. And the only proof that will be accepted is the proof of the white man or the white woman who has done research, regardless of whether they really understood the society they are theorizing. So the politics of knowledge and the politics of citation go together in ways that erases the works of Africans from the field. And so when you're looking at African history or Ghanaian history, I don't have to tell you, there are certain white Europeans whose work are all over African Ghanaian history. And if you don't cite them, your work is not seen as solid or legitimate. Then from the politics of citation, what is now being presented is this framework of knowledge. Our framework of knowledge is one in which we have to enter what I have always called whiteness, the epistemology of whiteness, the epistemology in which Europe is centered, white North America is centered, white Canada is centered, white Australia is centered, white New Zealand is centered. Your own reality is displaced to the margins. And so we are perpetually trying to speak to people who don't see us as we try to make advances in pushing and talking about African scholarship and knowledge production in Africa. So whatever we constitute as knowledge is always mediated by some white researcher. And if you write particularly an article that you're going to send to an international journals, and there are a lot of Africans who are there, that article will not be given much credence, probably maybe desk rejected on the basis that, well, you know, we're not quite sure about the scholarship, which is a subtle way of saying we can establish a scholarship only if we see white scholars there, only if we see the works of white researchers as part of your bibliography. If we don't see them, we don't really take it seriously. Then the other one is the borders, patrolling the borders, which is to say, you submit your work, the border patrol kicks in, the gatekeepers kick in. They have to establish whether your work merits what is defined as scholarship or knowledge by their standards. But it's a standard that doesn't even hear the language, doesn't speak the language, doesn't recognize the nuances of meanings that many African societies have, the sophisticated elements of their societies is not giving full play. Rather, what is giving full play is the ham-fisted type of grotesque narratives about Africa that appeals to the white vision of the African as a place of wilderness, a place of uncivilized people, uncivilized cultures, cultures that are lacking in sophistication. So this is the pivots on which the white epistemology rests on, and which the border patrols try to maintain. That was what we experienced most of the first decade of the 1990s. And so it became imperative that if we don't want to write ourselves out of history, write our own knowledge production into subjugation, continue perpetuating mental colonization, we really need to set up a mechanism, a framework, which in the various locales of Africa had in place when their universities were functioning, which is to say, the journals. Most of the universities had journals. University of Accra, Ghana had journals. Ibadan, in University of Ibadan, Nsukka, Lagos, Ife, Furabe College, they had journals. But the SAP, Structural Adjustment Program, and the restructuring of the economy was such that money was pulled out from tertiary education in Africa, which was what led to the collapse or near collapse of many of the universities, and which is why many of the professors left to various parts of the world to make a living for their families. So at that point in time where many of the journals were not existing in Africa, those of us who had come to the US decided, okay, we need to set up something here to continue the discussions. If we don't have to publish in their space. If you want to publish in their space, be our guest. Whatever instructions they give you that you have to meet to publish there, that's fine. But we need another space to begin to talk about what was going on in West Africa. Both the contemporary things going on in the space, areas of politics, whether it's in sociology, in history, in literature. We need a space for this discussion to happen. So we got together and set up West Africa Review. And the very first work we set up was that on wonders of the African world. And the amount of nerve it touched all over was impressive, to the point that an African-American journal now asked us if they could republish what West Africa Review had done. In solidarity, we allowed them to do that. But so this is part of the background of the journal, which is to say that the journal had a mission of presenting Africa the way Africans understand it. We are not saying we don't have flaws or shortcomings, but you cannot amplify our shortcomings to the detriment of our strengths. You cannot erase our histories that go back centuries and millennia because you want to cast our histories in the colonial present. Before colonialism, there were empires, states, principalities, caliphates, kingdoms all over Africa. In each of them, there were sophisticated cultural practices, social norms, sociology, which we even haven't had time to fully articulate and present. And so West Africa Review, for the space of the region, came out to tackle that. And to do that, we ask that people be bold in what they write, which is to say, speak boldly about who you are, speak boldly about your issues, your concerns, the solutions you're coming up, the problems you're anticipating, the compromises that you're making. Own your knowledge. And in owning your knowledge, own your own intellectual productivity. And so West Africa Review is a no holds barred, take no prisoners when you are talking about Africa. And that is what we define as the critical African studies. the African studies that is critical, that looks clearly and astutely through the issues, that has no need to depend on white theories, especially if those theories do not understand fully what West African cultures are about, the politics that they are bringing to bear, and the sophistication that they deploy. So one of my recent works, which I'm actually working on, is on Sankofa. And I know the Ghanaians will take me to tag for, it's not Sankofa, it's Sankofa. But there is a lot to unpack in that concept as a model of knowledge. And as a model of knowledge that is superior to some of the ideas that have come out from Western epistemology. What is what is epistemology? Theory of knowledge. I happen to be a philosopher. So knowledge is my business. And so when I talk about what some of the concepts in Africa have, needs to bring to the world to be able to push the world forward, you find that in Africa, but you need a space where we can discuss it without having to dilute it to make it palatable or amenable to former colonizers or those who believe that the single intellectual vision has to be that shaped by white male or white female scholars. So that's the foundational basis for West Africa Review, the journal, which then allowed us to take up any issues that are sent to us. And we do that mindfully of looking at what Africa has to offer, not just to West Africa, but to Africa at large and to the world. Every society brings its own ideas to the grand table in the world where we discuss what it is we have. There's a favorite proverb here in America: if you are not at the table, you are on the table, which is you are the meal that is being eaten at the table. So the last time Africa was on the table was 1884, 1885, the partition of Africa. Now we need to be on the table, at the table with other societies, other nationalities, other communities, making sure that our own ideas are presented. And so for us, it was always very critical, important to pay attention to the meanings we are bringing forth, to who we are citing, to the theories we want to utilize in framing Africa. And you find a lot of Africans talking about individuality, which is a very Eurocentric mechanism that was utilized to undermine the lower class of Europe. Because when you are an individual or you are individualized, it becomes hard for you to get together, to create a network, to form groups that would challenge the monarchy. And you have to ask yourself, humanity. What does humanity mean? And we as Africans cannot allow those who construed as humanity as non-existent to define what humanity is about. So I'll briefly end at this point by just saying that knowledge is objective. Knowledge is objective when every person is geared towards maintaining and looking for the best interpretation within the paradigm you're working with. But there's a larger paradigm circulating that for many Africans, which is one that does not see our humanity. And so if our humanity has to be seen in the world, we have to be able to blow apart that outer boundaries that hems our humanity in, so that our knowledge production can take place in the international space, speaking from the Africa location with no apologies to anyone. If you have any questions to ask in relation to what we experienced or what we have been doing, I can talk about that, but knowing that having passed on the baton to your group, I will be looking at what this group is going to do. And I am expecting you are going to blow our minds.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, distinguished SUNY Professor Nkiru Nzegwu. So colleagues, I mean, this is great mentoring and this is privileged information. So Monica, you are here, Lauren, you are here, Simon, you are here. Yeah, you joined us late, you were struggling with the link, but you are here. Azuka, the chief host, is also there. I mean, for me, I'm sure, Monica, your picture is smiling and it tells me your face is also smiling behind the screen. This orientation, I think, is not only for our work as editorial board members of the West Africa Review, but for our work as academics. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure as distinguished professor is speaking, it is talking to us, really, the experiences we have had, the levels of rejection of our papers. It clicks desktop rejection, you know, and then, you know, sorry, this, that. And the stress you have to then, when reviewers give you feedback, they will force you read this book, cite this book. If they don't see certain citations, it won't pass and you are forced to make some citations. So now our distinguished—
And those people you are asked to cite are not people that look like you.
So our distinguished professor has now told us the history behind it, that epistemology of the West, the border patrol, the white assumptions, theorizing being a privilege of the white, depriving our humanity, the colonization of knowledge. You know, we feel we have intellectual property, but it appears we don't really have that intellectual property. So that's the professor of philosophy giving us great insight. So colleagues, ask your questions. This one, I think, it goes beyond our work as editors of the West African Review, but our work as scholars is a very good orientation for us. And what does it mean? It means that as we are going to be reviewers, editors, and all of that, we should know the kind of publications, what should inform our approval of the publications. And we shouldn't reinvent the wheel and then go and do that, you know, that treatment that it doesn't help us. African-centered, African domain, and knowledge, we have knowledge and we are independent-minded and we can also theorize. So colleagues, I give you the chance to come with questions and comments. Otherwise, I'm going to call each of you because I must hear your voices. So otherwise, I'll start calling names. So if you don't want me to start calling names, Dr. Mensah, I've called your name already. Yeah, make your input, question, answer, comment, how you can connect to the information and how it will help us in our work and your general orientation as an academic. Yeah. And show your face. The professor is showing her beautiful face. Show your face so that, professor, if it's fine, depending on where you are, if it's okay to show your face so that professor can connect the faces. She's handing over to us a huge legacy.
Okay, yes.
A huge legacy.
Simon Peter.
Yeah, you have seen Simon Peter's face. Yes.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you, Prof.
Good to meet you.
So who go? Monica, yeah, you have it. Okay, and there is a comment, and Laura has dropped a comment. I don't know that Laura wants. I'm sure I haven't had more time to chat with Laura, but I'm sure Laura, Lauren, Lauren, sorry, Lauren, Dr. Lauren Adams. I'm sure she's connecting well with you, and by her profile. I mean, she is based in Ghana, and when I met Lauren, she said, "My mom is here. She's married to a Ghanaian with her kids. They're all based in Ghana, and I'm sure she is pushing that agenda. When I look at the aura around her, I see that she loves us and she's with us. So she's dropped a message that in the chat room that I am deeply inspired by this work and added to be a part of it. That is from Laura, Dr. Lauren Adams. So Monica, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. And good evening to everyone. I must say a big thank you to the professor who just presented. In fact, just like Laura, I am so inspired by Lauren.
Yes.
Yes, I am very inspired. I'm very inspired in Africa Review came to being, and I really appreciate the efforts that have gone in all these years. In fact, when I was called as part of the editorial board, I had a little bit of confusion as to what the journal is all about. But this talk has really opened up my mind to what this journal is all about. And listening to her carefully, immediately I started pointing out some topics in my head we can call for papers on. I realized that Azuka's comments to my call for paper, I now realize and appreciate why she was hating on what is Africa doing. Can I get some African authors? Azuka, now understand you. So I am going to work right away on it and make sure that whatever the vision of this journal is incorporated in our call for papers. I really appreciate this talk.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof, for having me.
Yeah. Lauren, do you want to have the go?
Sure, I can add. Thank you for providing all that context. I did look into the journal quite extensively and was excited, mostly because I can connect to the work and the criticality and just the need for space for folks, African folks, to share their knowledge. My background is in education in a US context, but primarily my research is around educating Black children. And I can say that what you're saying around African knowledge and whiteness holds true for Black researchers in the States writing about Black students as well. Like it's still, if it doesn't meet the white gaze or is accepted generally by white researchers or white academics, then it's harder, more difficult, I would say, to get your work published. So I appreciate you all taking the lead to create this space so that more folks can get their work out into the world and in a way that's authentic to the people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. That's really your domain. I mean, your passion for Black kids speaks for itself. And I'm sure you can connect well with this work based on your passion and your background. Simon, I'm the moderator here.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much, everyone. I've really enjoyed I've also been reflecting. I am an educational technologist, information technologist, and we've always been asking decolonization. It's like when you mention technology, people always think technology is synonymous to the Western world. But we also have some kind of technologies that we could also showcase it. We could also make it known to the world. So I'm happy to be on board and to also contribute as an educational technologist from Africa. Thank you.
Just to piggyback on what Simon Peter just said, when we think of technology, even of today, we tend to remove Africa. But when you get to the West and people are using their cards to get money from the bank, we tend to forget that M-Pesa, which was evolved, invented, produced in Kenya, was the first place it was tested. They came up with it. They were able to utilize the postal service and the banking system in very creative ways to do that. And that became a model that even the Western banks are using, but they won't give Africa credit for it. Election observers. It was Africans in the context of the Kenyan election that came up with a way in which crowdsourcing of what was happening on the ground could be facilitated and achieved. That has become a template that is now used all over the world, but again, Africa doesn't get credit because Africa is not seen as technological savvy. Africa moved from landline straight into the digital. And what they are doing with the digital, people in the United States, many areas of the United States don't and cannot even do it. And this is when Africa totally has not even been connected. Imagine what will happen if the connection was all overboard. So technology, even as it's structured today, Africa has been playing a role, both in the advancement of even the AI. One of the central figures in AI technology and the ethics of AI is an African woman, many of them from Ethiopia, some from Eritrea, parts of South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, all over the world. These are African women who are at the forefront of the AI. And many of them came from Africa when they were teenagers. And you know how over in the America, they will be disregarded as, well, it will have to take you about another 100 years to get to that point. They enter the top schools and they are pioneers in the areas, including a young Senegalese woman who has to speak how many languages? And she's a professor now at, I believe, in Princeton, AI. So AI, current technology, Africans are there. Africans that I know in the United States, but they are linked up with Africans on the continent. So speaking to Simon Peter, we are in the vanguard of this new technology, but there's also areas of other technologies that the West may not know that you are talking about, need to be brought out and showcased. And that's very critical. One of the things that I have been looking at, they call it fractal geometry. Fractal geometry is about, the knowledge is 50 years old in the West. But fractal geometry is a design concept that permeates nearly all the cultures of Africa. And the basis of the geometry is one that moves into the area they even call chaos theory. But that chaos theory was something that the Africans had worked through, utilized it even in their design of their clothes, the design of their hairstyles, their architecture, their visual representations. So there's so much that we have. The problem, the big problem, we're not publishing them fast enough.
That's us. That's us. Professor, now you have just turned into Professor of Technology, from Professor of Philosophy to Professor of Technology. And I'm sure you can have hours of lecture on this. Yeah. What do you want to say in response to what our Professor of Philosophy turned into Professor of Technology, our distinguished Professor of SUNY University? Yao, are you in good standing? Oh, he has dropped again. Oh, he was having challenges connecting.
Yes.
So we've missed Yao, but I'm happy that I made us record it. And Professor, with your permission, and then Azuka also hearing and listening. In fact, this is a tape I would want to share with my faculty, if I have your permission, because we don't understand why our papers keep getting rejected, and now this gives us that understanding. And also, as young, okay, Azuka says, yeah, permission granted. As young and then, early career and then growing professors also, it is good for us to have this legacy, this carry on information, historical information, so that in our own way, we see that colonization has never ended. And then see how we can decolonize ourselves, so that as we grow up to be scholars and managers of university administration, because at university, if we had time, I'm sure my colleagues will talk about our University of Ghana, for instance, and how we say Scopus indexing papers before you get promotion, how you should publish in all those citation index also, and so I don't even know how to mention them, those matrices. And then you see the bar, the standard that, and I'm happy with what you spoke about, structural adjustment program and its effect on investment into tertiary education and how it's affected, because journals, we're not able to grow our local journals, and they are dying, because who pays the editor and this and that, and we don't invest into it. So really, even our progression we have sold ourselves, and our promotion guidelines are towards the West. We have something like Africa Journal Online. To what extent does my university regard that platform? They will say publish, or Sage, Taylor and Francis, and Sylvia, and if you don't publish there, these my young professors, they cannot become full professors in the university. So really, it is a big, big thing. And I know, as they are listening, who knows, some of them will be vice chancellors tomorrow. And when they get into that decision-making position and in administration, then we can share for us to know that the more we do that, the more we are colonizing ourselves and selling ourselves to the West. So this is really a brilliant statement. And maybe you want to have, you are back. Do you want to have a final before the professor gives her final statement? Because we promised to have 1 hour meeting. So you have
Yes, Prof. I must apologize.
That's okay.
I've had internet challenges, yes. But I had, I think, the last 10 minutes of her, what she said. And I do really appreciate her depth in knowledge. And you did indicate that she had given us a lot. So basically, I will be looking at namespaces and symbols, and as to how that is actually changing probably our knowledge base here in West Africa, as to whether we are able to transform ourselves and then our community, focusing on our own names, our own symbols, and then what these represent for us. So I think having listened to her last 10 minutes, what she said actually sits well with me, and I'll focus on that. And I know that she'll be around to help us if we need any clarification on some of these issues. Thank you, Prof.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, so I think I'm reading, Azuka is telling that there'll be workshops coming up, and we should get on board to have more of this insight, because it's brilliant. And as a young faculty, we have to reorient ourselves. Otherwise, we'll continue to commit the mistakes and then, look down on what we have and uphold and what is coming from the West. And it will not be good for us and our future and our sustainability. So I'm sure I would want to add my voice to my colleagues and say, Professor, we have appreciated you a lot. And this, I'm happy we have recorded it. So yeah, you haven't missed much. It's a recorded speech, and we would share with you, and you can share. We have the permission to share it with our colleagues so that they can get this reorientation, and then we position ourselves to do it better. So Professor, I think whilst you have your final word, before you started, so you close down the curtain, I would say thank you very much for this insightful presentation. Yes.
My closing remarks would be that it's imperative that people who are on the continent take responsibility in shaping the path for going, including talking to the librarians, and you talked about the vice chancellors. Vice chancellors respond to what is out there. And so they allocate money to certain databases. But the question is, those databases, what do they say about Africa? How many African intellectuals are in those databases? And how is the materials about Africa in those databases spear forwarding and turbocharging the pathway for Africans? If they are not doing that, then it's money not well spent, because you can't spend money for your own subjugation. That's one. Which means that as scholars, we also have to step up to educating even the chancellors and even the librarians, that they need to be very critical about the kind of materials and the databases to which they subscribe. We see some of the materials that come through from Africa, and the people are citing those who tell them that they are not humans. And they don't seem to understand what is saying, one about themselves, and the second about the work they are doing. So you need to be centered. You need your humanity to be validated. And you need the works that do that to surround you and your scholarship. And you need to go where those kind of works are, because those other type of databases are not designed for you and are not designed for you to begin to unleash your productivity that will then bring down the epistemological framework of whiteness. So to center Africa, you are in a pitched battle of ideas. It's not just a battle of earning money, of moving. It's a battle for the future, for your children, your children's children. What are you arming them with when they grow up to say, here is what I have to utilize to battle and create the space for myself? Are we leaving them with materials which keeps reinforcing the idea that they are lesser than? They are always second-class citizens, and they have to work as second-class people for those who live in the God's own country. And yet, God is African.
Wow.
That's it. Oh, wow. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. And I will hope to, as Azuka has said, whenever there's a workshop, we're happy to have the link so that we can listen, because I can see the energy and, the energy the Lord has given you. And I can see that you can lecture for hours on this that you are so passionate about without reading anything. It's all in your heart and you bring it from there. Mm-hmm. And it means that it's been a lifelong experience you've had. And we are happy that you have passed some over to us, and we hold it dearly. And that means that we don't even have to wait to be vice chancellor, but in any small way we find ourselves, we should push it at our own writing level. What theories? And as we are privileged to be editors of the West African Review, we should know the kind of content we bring out so that we don't maintain that status quo, but we make Africa proud by our output. Thank you, Professor, and we appreciate your time. And I'm sure that we can reach you anytime possible.